Good evening, thanks for coming. If you do have a mobile, if you would like to put it on silent, please. Thanks very much. Right, a massive welcome to Ian R. Crane with Global Crackdown, the Total Control Agenda. Tonight, Ian, former oil industry executive, turned fracking industry pain in the backside, originator of the AV conferences and the UK column regular, focuses on the little-known Coudenhove-Kalgeri Plan, now almost 100 years old, which coldly sets forth the elimination of nations, the reduction of the people of Europe, that's us, to slavery, with a final goal of one world government where corporations and the state rule with an iron fist. Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalgeri might be dead, but as Ian points out, his poison and strange philosophy linger on via environmental disregard, total surveillance, transatlantic trade and investment partnership and trans-Pacific partnership, sustainable development. Ian tonight reveals our choices. Please welcome Ian R. Crane.
As always, it's an absolute pleasure to be here at New Horizons. Unfortunately, I always seem to bring the weather as well. But thanks for fighting your way through the rain. So before I really get into this, I just want to make it very clear that I'm going to be getting into some pretty dark areas during the course of the discussion. But you know, there is often the accusation that this is fear porn. You know, that all we're doing is really trying to sort of raise the fear level. But actually, you know, that's a defensive mechanism to try to prevent people from actually doing the research for themselves. Because the reality is that although we are in a rather dark place in terms of the agenda against humanity, and that's what it is, as Obama said a few months ago, it is a war on humanity. And as I know many of you have heard me say before, those who think they are the rightful rulers, and by the way, we're going to change the nomenclature. You know, we hear people talking about the ruling elite. They are not the elite, they are parasites. They are the ruling parasites. And just like parasites need a host, these parasites need a host, and that host is humanity. And unfortunately, you know, it's up to us to deal with those parasites and shake them off. So, although, you know, we are in a sort of tough times, the reality is that the greater the insanity, the greater the opportunity. Because the more outrageous the agenda gets, then the more people start to take note and start to say, oh my God, all those conspiracy theorists who have been trying to raise awareness of this for many years might have actually had a point. You know, and I've always made the observation, I don't claim any special insight, I simply read the scripts. Because this is all out there, and certainly for the last 20 odd years, pretty much everything is out there and it is freely available, but you have to make the effort to look for it. You also have to know what you're looking for. You have to look at the documents that are produced by a lot of the, well, they're not so secret, but groups like the Bilderbergs, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations. And within those documents, they absolutely spell out what the game plan is. And as Rob has alluded to, you know, as we go through the evening, you're going to see that a lot of things that are unfolding, supposedly, randomly, have actually been very, very carefully crafted. And if anybody thinks that the manipulation of the masses just can't be real, did anybody see the recent Darren Brown episode where he had 3 people and they built up to the point where each of these 3 people was asked to push somebody off of a roof? Yeah. And 2 of them did it. Yeah. And the program, and you find this online, it's on Channel 4. Just search for Darren Brown, Channel 4, and it was one that went out a few weeks ago. And the program focuses on the one person who ultimately, so I'm spoiling it for you here, didn't push the guy off the roof. But that particular individual still made a number of decisions in the run-up to that actually we would consider to be sociopathic, i.e. not in the interests of humanity, and certainly not humane even. So that's presented as entertainment. Imagine what would happen if the establishment had access to that kind of manipulative capability. And of course they do. You know, they're very, very good at what they do. They've had a lot of practice. So we do have a lot of opportunity here. And you know, fortunately, it's a double-edged sword, because as more and more people see through the veneer, then the establishment accelerates its agenda, because they realize that as more and more people see through it, then it becomes more and more difficult for them to implement. And of course, as they accelerate it, more and more people see through it. So how is this going to pan out? Who knows? But a lot of the emphasis on how this pans out is going to be on how we, the collective we, actually respond to it. Do we sit back and say, as they want us to say, well, what can we do about it? What can we do about it? Well, has Pippa King spoken here at New Horizons?
She's booked.
She's booked, okay. Well, that is a presentation that you absolutely have to see. Because Pippa King is the epitome of what one person can achieve. Because if it wasn't for Pippa King, then right now, biometrics in school and RFID tagging of all our children in school would be the norm. But Pippa King has been on this case for a decade, and although she's not single-handed anymore, but it's still a small band of people that are fighting this. But here is a music teacher from Hull who did everything that she was doing beneath the radar until literally about 18 months or so ago. And it was only after 18 months that she started to actually come out in public and talk about you know, how she'd achieved this. And this is, for me, the classic example of what one person focused on actually stopping an outrageous agenda. In fact, there was a school in Chester that had an experiment where all the children were wearing radio frequency identification tags on a lanyard right over their heart chakra. And this was tracking the kids all the way through from, supposedly, from the time they walked through the school gates until they left the school gates. But it doesn't take much of an extrapolation to say, well, you know, once you extend the receivers, the transmitter receivers, into the streets, then you can follow the kids wherever. And the software was so sophisticated, it identified groups. So it identified social groups within the school. So it established whether you were one of the nerds or the jocks or, you know, whatever. The smokers, the drug takers. But it would literally put this into the school system. This is data mining. And of course they wouldn't do it with adults, because they know the adults, in most cases, will tell them where to stick it. So they start with the children to normalize it. And as I'm sure most of you are aware, they're normalizing biometrics right now because most children have to give their thumbprint or fingerprints to actually get their school lunches. That's something that Pippa hasn't stopped. But what she has achieved is the opt-out. The opt-out has to be offered to all parents to not have their children give their thumbprints. But that is 100% down to Pippa King. So there's an example of what one person can achieve. But you know, the establishment obviously thinks that the people of Blackpool need a little bit of suppression, because maybe you're getting a bit too uppity. So I just want to do a check. Did everybody take their meds before they came out tonight? Did you? Yep. Because apparently Blackpool is the antidepressant capital of the UK. More money spent on happy pills in Blackpool than anywhere else in the country. The NHS cash spent on antidepressants per person, £10.46. So, you know, antidepressants, well, why would you want antidepressants? I mean, of course, unfortunately, antidepressants are absolutely endemic right across the country. I mean, the fact that Blackpool is top of the list, you know, is a minor issue, really. It's a problem right across the whole of the country. But, you know, the north of England right now is seriously under attack, one way or another. And this is just from last year, affected areas here. Anyone remember what this is? No. Yeah. This is the cryptosporidium, affecting some 300,000 people, you know, right through the Fylde, down through West Lancashire here. Cryptosporidium, where everyone was told they had to boil their water for, I think, close on about 6 weeks or so. Right, do you know what, can anyone remember what reason was given for this outbreak of cryptosporidium? Partridge, exactly. It wasn't a partridge in a pear tree, it was a partridge in a water main. Yeah, a partridge, right. The bottom line is they probably don't know. But the partridge, if you actually search online, there was another case in 2007, not in Lancashire, but that was blamed on a partridge. So called it a hunch, but I think somebody said, well, you know, partridge caused it in 2007. Well, let's just blame it on a partridge again. But we don't really know. And I wouldn't trust the water authorities anyway. Can anyone remember what happened at Camelford in 1988? Yes. An outrageous amount of aluminium sulfide deposited in the drinking water of the Camelford community, which is on the Devon-Cornwall border. And what happened was that a tanker driver was dropping off aluminium sulfide, which is used in sort of microscopic quantities in the water. But this guy deposited something like 30 tons of it, and he didn't know which tank to put it in. And when he arrived at the water plant, there was nobody there. So he got on the phone and he said, there's nobody here, you know, where do I put the aluminium sulfide? And they said, well, we've left a key for you. It's under a rock by the gate. And he said, but you know, there's 6 tanks here. Which tank do I put it in? And they said, well, you know, it's not going to matter because the key only fits 1 tank. So whichever lock it fits, that's the one to drop it in. Well, unfortunately, somebody left him the master key. So he thought he got lucky when the first tank that he opened, you know, unlocked, and he dropped his load in there. And the people of Camelford noticed very quickly that there was something wrong with their water. And I kid you not, the official response was, yep, we know about this, but there's nothing to worry about, absolutely nothing to worry about. Just mix it with orange juice. Mix the water with orange juice and hold your nose. Now, I wasn't living in the country in '88, but I was alerted to this a few years ago when I happened to be talking to somebody who was working with a water purity charity, and he had got involved with this charity after 1992 because he used to live in Camelford, and his wife got sick towards the end of 1988, and unfortunately her health never recovered, and he's absolutely convinced that her death was as a direct result of that contamination. Okay, when did the British government finally acknowledge that there had indeed been an unfortunate contamination, an unfortunate accident which had led to the contamination of Camelford's water?
Years ago.
Exactly. In fact, there was an allusion to it just before the end of the Labour government in 2010, but they didn't actually end up making a formal statement. The formal statement came after the Tories came into power, which is quite strange, of course, because it was the Tories in power in 1988 when it occurred. So this cover-up had been effectively for 23 years. 23 years. So do I have any confidence that the establishment are going to reveal the true cause of any contamination? They're going to do whatever they can to try and suppress it and get away with it, because they don't want to pay for any liability. So, yeah, I think it was last August, forced to boil water through the cryptosporidium bug. Did anybody get sick from that, by the way? Yeah? Yeah, it caused diarrhea and stomach upset. Yeah.
Just at 40 days, you go up to 40 and that's all. Galway, just south of Lancaster, it wasn't there.
Okay, so you're lucky. But apparently it cost them 25 million. This is why they want to keep it quiet as much as possible. You know, and those of you who remember my presentation on the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster from nearly 6 years ago, you know, will recall the story of how they used an extremely toxic chemical, Corexit 9500, to sink the slick. Because their lawyers identified that the way to minimize their liability was to make the slick invisible. Because the US legislation at the time based the liability on the size of the visible slick. So the lawyers said, well, easier than just make it invisible. And they said, well, how are we going to do that? So they called the chemists in, and they said, well, we've got this extremely toxic chemical which isn't actually allowed or permitted to be used anywhere else in the world, but there doesn't appear to be any such legislation here in the US, so let's use that, sink the slick. Which is what they did, sunk the slick, but in the process made it 5 times bigger than the original size, and of course have effectively killed off the Gulf. So this is the sort of corporatist behaviour. Now I have to say that you know, there was a friend of mine who, when he read that a parasite had been found in Lancashire's water, he thought, a bit like Obama swimming in the Gulf after the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, I think. Anyway, so you've had the assault on the cryptosporidium, and of course you're getting a bit uppity on some other issues as well in the area, and so they want to make sure apparently that the next generation of do you call them blackpudlians? Yeah? Sandgrolians. Okay. Well, you know, make sure the next generation of them don't get too uppity. So this was announced literally about 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, just do a straw poll. Anyone think this is a good idea?
No.
We fought it a couple of years. We actually fought it. That's the second time.
The second time.
We fought it 2.5 years ago.
Well, of course, there's a push around the country. I mean, Bedford managed to get the fluoride taken out of the water, I think in 1988, and now there's a big push to get it back in. But, you know, a modicum of research, of course, would suggest that actually has nothing at all to do with the benefit in teeth. In fact, you know, my dentist, he occasionally says, no, I know I'm wasting my breath, but I've got to tell you anyway, because I'm paid to tell you. And as he tells me about, you know, the importance of using fluoride, his eyes roll in the back of the head. So I know he doesn't believe what he's saying. He's actually only saying it because he can claim a certain amount of money, because he's told, you know, one of his patients that they should be using a fluoridated toothpaste. And I mean, the other problem is, you know, I think it probably was the 80s and 90s more so than now, but dentists were deliberately filling children's teeth with mercury. Yeah, and of course this has an added problem as well. And I'll leave you to do your own research as to what happens when fluoride mixes with mercury. So just a short extract, I mean, for those of you who aren't aware, but I know most of you are, new evidence has linked fluoride and other chemicals to brain disorders. What other unknown effects might this industrial byproduct added to our water supply have? Of course, this is, you know, in the milk and the water eventually maybe. An examination of water fluoridation's shadowy history reveals potentially disturbing ramifications for human consciousness, and of course it calcifies the pineal. You know, locking people into the physical, empirical, material realm. Removing any possibility of making any connect with the wider realm. So we thought Blackpool was under attack. So last December, and I know you had a presentation on this for those of you that were here last week, the whole of the north of England is now effectively under environmental attack.